When one layer is stacked on top of another in the timeline panel, the way that the images interact is determined by the blending mode. If the blending mode is normal, which is the default, then the image information in the topmost layer is simply overlaid on top of the image information in the bottommost layer. And if the transparency in the topmost layer is 0, or if the opacity is 100%, none of the bottommost layer shines through. If we look in the composition panel here, we have the can, and we have the background. And since normal is the current blending mode, none of the background shows through the can. But there are many blending modes to choose from, and most of these allow the two images to blend together so that you can see some aspect of each in the composite. You don't really need to memorize all of these blending modes and what each of them does. The best thing to do is to experiment. Fortunately, there are handy keyboard shortcuts for this. If you press Shift and the equal sign, or Shift and the dash on the main keyboard, you can cycle through the blending modes. I'll just slowly press Shift equals and cycle through the blending modes here so that you can see some of the various results. The dissolve and dancing dissolve blending modes are really only interesting in animation, but the rest look interesting even in still images. I'm continuing to press Shift and equals. And I'm continuing to press Shift and equals. And notice we're getting all sorts of interesting results. Now, let's say, for example, that we have a client who's told us that he thinks that our simple can on top of background image is too boring, and he wants it to look more interesting. He wants it to pop. Well, we might go through these blending modes and just see if there's some way of blending the two images together to make them look more interesting. Well, now we're back at normal, and I haven't seen anything that really appeals to me, but you don't have to use the blending modes in isolation with one layer stacked on top of another. One thing that can often work very well is to make a duplicate of a layer and then blend it with itself. For example, let's duplicate the aqua gold layer, which is the can layer, by pressing Ctrl-D or Command-D on macOS. And then I'll set this to screen. Now notice, the screen blending mode is making the whole can just appear to shine a little bit more. And I'll press Shift and the equals sign to go through a few more of the options. And you can see that blending a layer with itself can actually give some rather pleasing results. But let's say that our client still isn't happy. He thinks this is too boring. Well, I have an idea, which is that I'll go to the difference blending mode, which when I have one layer on top of another and the layers are identical, difference is going to give us a result of black. What difference is doing is it's subtracting the color of this layer from this layer, and when you subtract one item from itself, you get 0, of course. But now, I'm going to go to the position property by pressing P, showing just position, and I'm going to Alt-click on the stopwatch, that's Option-click on macOS, to create an expression, and I'm going to type a very simple expression, which is wiggle, parenthesis, 10, comma, 10. And then click outside of the expression field. And here, what's happening is that the position is being wiggled or randomized slightly, and it's wiggling at 10 times per second. So one of these 10s represents the amplitude of the wiggle, and the other represents the frequency. So if I click RAM Preview, what we see is a wiggling, jittering can with the colors actually being the differences between this layer and its copy. Now, I think this looks a little bit too frenetic, but my client wanted something more exciting, so maybe this will please him. The point here is just to show that with blending modes, you can do all sorts of creative things just with a little bit of experimentation. The thing to keep in mind is that the blending mode determines how one layer blends with the composite of the layers underneath it, and you have a lot of blending modes to choose from, and it's very easy to cycle through them with Shift-dash or Shift-equals on the main keyboard.